So a lot of people ask me what's gonna be better for my vertical jump, a deep squat or squatting to parallel with a heavy weight, or a quarter squat. Now let's actually break this down and look at the forces created in a heavy squat. So here, I get a better unweighing phase, but I'm still around 1200 newtons of force, so I'm not getting anywhere near a full unweighing phase like I would in a vertical jump, but that's okay because this is not specific, this is general strength. So we're not looking for these movements to sync up perfectly, right? So decent unweighing phase, then I start to put on the brakes. At the very bottom, I'm gonna hit my peak braking force at just less than 2200 newtons of force. It's actually not very high. And then let's see, my peak concentric force is just over 2200 newtons of force. Not very high. So when you hear people say squatting is going to improve your general ability to produce force, which is gonna increase your potential, you gotta understand that my peak forces are actually less in a heavy back squat than they would in a standing jump, especially in an approach jump. Now, what is the one advantage that I'm getting from a heavy back squat that I can't get from a quarter squat and I can't get from jumping itself? Well, force over time. And so if you just look at this curve, we don't have super high peak forces, but it's really, really wide. And so there's two ways to improve your standing vertical jump: either produce a higher peak force, or I could produce force over a longer period of time. So those are the two ways to increase your impulse, which increases your vertical jump. The problem is that's only really true on a standing vertical jump, and that's why researchers have been asking the wrong question for the last several decades when we look at squatting and how it relates to vertical jump. When we look at an approach jump, it's entirely different. All right, before I get too far ahead of myself, let me show you my quarter squat. Now, if you really break down the research and you remove the good studies from the bad studies, the good studies will show that a quarter squat is gonna be better at improving your vertical jump in general, especially when we're dealing with more advanced athletes. With beginner athletes, it's a little bit more even. But I know some of you guys are gonna go on Google right now and type in full squats versus quarter squats, and some of you will find that a full squat or a squat to parallel is just as beneficial. What you wanna look for though is what are the weights used, because I can squat a lot more weight in this position than I can in a full squat. And so sometimes the researchers use the same weight for the full squat as they would in that quarter squat, and that's just not a fair comparison at all. And so in my little case study, I added 70 extra pounds. Now I could probably go even heavier than that, and I'm gonna get down to about a 90-degree angle. This is as deep as I would ever get on an approach jump. Even the deepest jumpers don't get much lower than this 90-degree angle. And so what do we see? We see a pretty high braking force, 2,700 newtons of force. And then let's look at my peak concentric. We're up over 3,000 newtons of force. So you can see in this quarter squat, I'm hitting way higher peak forces. Now, what else do we notice about this? The curve is smaller. So I produced higher peak forces and I did it over a shorter period of time. Now remember, how do we improve vertical jump? Either we improve the peak force on our jump or we increase the width. Now the problem is in sports, I have time constraints. Anytime that I'm approaching on my vertical, I have ground contact time constraints, which means that I can no longer realistically improve my vertical by increasing the amount of time that I'm producing force, right? I could try to do that and it would look a lot like this. I would bring in all this speed and then I would be down here and I would completely kill all of that approach speed, and now my vertical would suck. Now you see this a lot with great standing jumpers. So if you look at like the box jump world record, I think it's like 63 inches, but it's down here, right? We're all the way down here. Deeper range of motion means we have more time to produce force, meaning we probably have pretty low peak forces and we have a really wide curve. And again, that works in a standing position. Now, take that same athlete, and I've done this over and over again, those guys that like to get really low, and now bring in high approach speed, their vertical actually goes down because now you have time constraints, which means their superpower of getting really low and muscling their way out of the bottom no longer works. So when we look at improving approach vertical jump, especially for one leg, but also for two legs, we pretty much can only improve by increasing the peak force, as long as the time constraints are the same. So I may only have 0.2 seconds or less to produce the force. So on that concentric portion, I probably have less than 0.2 seconds. So I cannot improve by increasing the width of that curve. I can only improve by increasing the peak force. And so when you look at these deep squats and you say, well, you produce a lot of force, you actually produce lower peak force than you would in a quarter squat. So you may get that deep squat to translate over to a standing vertical jump, because what you see is people actually shift their mechanics. When they get really strong in those deep squats, a lot of times they'll actually drop lower when you retest them because they're stronger in these lower positions. And so their standing vertical jump goes up, but their approach does not. And so when we look at which one is better for vertical jump, a quarter squat or a deep squat, from a standing vertical jump perspective, pretty similar, but I would go with the quarter squat. But when we look from an approach standpoint, that quarter squat is so far superior to any half squat or deep squat. It is not even a question. I'm going with the quarter squat all day, every day. Now, of course, I'm not saying that deep squats and half squats are bad, because hey, it's better at increasing hypertrophy. So if you got a kid who's a stick figure and they just need to improve their mass so that they can hang a little bit better on the court, we want to start them off there. From a fat loss perspective, like in our Fat Don't Fly program, we start off with squatting to parallel, because that's what's going to be better for mass. Because it's so wide, we're getting more time under tension, and that's always going to be better from a hypertrophy standpoint. And so it's good early on, but eventually you want to get more specific and move towards those quarter squats.